Welcome, everybody. Today, I want to explore the idea that's deeply overlooked, I think, and most people don't think about how architecture is not just a shelter. The spaces we inhabit actually impact not only our brains, our connection to each other, ourselves, the mental health of our minds, and our overall attitudes in the world as agents in this arena we call Earth or the world. It is, in fact, a medicine and can be treated as such. And every space we enter is either healing or quietly hurting and destroying us. We walk through spaces, buildings, and the thing with architecture is that it's not neutral. It definitely is always having an impact on us. They shape our nervous system, our emotions, our thoughts. And of course, the crux of this discussion has to do with our spiritual state. So let's talk about how architecture can actually heal the human mind from both a biophilic, meaning the love of nature, philia, like philosophia, filio type of love that one has for a dear friend or for somebody. And bio, of course, meaning natural living things. And approaching this from a spiritual perspective. So, we as human beings actually did not evolve in modern day buildings. You know, like in my city here, they're taking down the province's science center, which has a very dear place in my heart, and I learned to ride my bike in the parking lot. That's besides the point. They're replacing it with condominiums. And you see, these condominiums are actually not built to enrich life or support consciousness, really, in any way, to cultivate it. It's meant to be accessible, efficient, a place to sleep, a place to rest, a place to make food, and quietly designed to leave to work every day, really. There's not much else in there. A place to put your TV, you know. So when we live in spaces with no nature, no light, no sensory depth, our brain actually interprets it as stress. And it's not good. It's a type of pressure. And you see, this pressure causes a disconnect. And that's how we're alienated, even though we're meant to be living in the most connected time than ever before. Of course, isolation is an epidemic. And this is why the biophilic architecture exists, to restore the nature, the balance that the modern life has taken away from us, really. So, another interpretation of biophilia, which means the love of life, the love of nature. And it's this innate state that, we love nature and we're inseparable from it because we come out of nature. And so when we're surrounded by natural materials and natural patterns, the body changes. Having plants around in our homes and environments actually lower cortisol, the stress hormone in our brains. Sunlight increases serotonin. Just looking up at the sky is literally healing. It can heal our vision. It actually improves our vision. The sounds of running water shifts us into meditative states, like the alpha brain waves. Wood textures add a sense of comfort, a groundingness. And, these are places that can be found in like a Japanese Zen garden or a Nordic spa where it's built out of wood for grounding stability. And of course, we know there's research studies now being shown that, patients actually, their zest for life and they actually improve physically when they have view to a garden. And so, this begs the question, why don't we have gardens everywhere throughout the city? Why don't we have walkable cities, without seeing the craziest things on the streets and people. Why don't we have more meditative spaces throughout the city? Like literally meditation centers. And of course, we know that kids learn better with natural sunlight in schools. This is one of the things that confuses me the most with universities. The low ceilings, the fluorescent lights. It's supposed to be a place for ideas, for expanding the consciousness, not limiting it. Workplaces with greenery also have less stress-related sick days. I mean, this is research. And this isn't an aesthetic preference. This is neuroscience. And so this is where we get into like the neurochemistry of architecture. And of course, we know light is a medicine. Light is healing. And all the darkness will be brought to light in this ascension and this evolution of humanity. So not just physical light, but also psychological, emotional, spiritual light is really the basis here. James Turrell works with light often, and we know his works, how much they've changed and influenced how we see space, how other artists interpret and design their things. In every ancient culture, light is a symbol of divinity, clarity, revelation, and peace. And architects throughout history have used light to create, just inner transformation. The Bible, the greatest book ever written, you can see what it has to say about light. Literally just Google Bible verses with the word light. We think about like sunlight in a cathedral, or the silence of light in minimalistic Japanese temples. Taro Ando, one of the masters of Japanese architecture, or just architecture in general, uses light almost as a spiritual material. His Church of Light is one of the greatest churches or buildings created in this century. And that creates a stillness. And not only a stillness, a humility. It literally humbles us because the sun is greater, more stronger than us, and it's always shining. It's always radiating there. And so if we think about how light actually changes and shifts consciousness and how it changes who we are in a space, almost all modern buildings, spaces are starving us of it. Sacred geometry. It's another dimension of healing in architecture. For thousands of years, architecture wasn't just functional, it was cosmic. It was always pointing upwards, kind of like how we should be doing with our buildings and innovations. Because we are one humanity, one global race here on Earth. And we should be working together to point upwards, especially with AI and these artificial machines coming down and evolving. We should already be in a position once they actually come and become more intelligent than us, then they have a role model to look up to, and we could, in this symbiosis, evolve together into new heights for all the people of Earth as one people, as one humanity. And so, the golden ratios, the spirals, now it's a Gucci logo, but the golden spaces, these divine proportions exist all around us. And back in the day, architects would actually implement that in the way they would design churches, buildings, even artists like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, the way they would paint or sculpt. Because these are patterns that mirror nature. And so if we're going to heal and actually evolve, there's no other place to exist on Earth than without this. Because if we continue going down the way we're going right now, I see us falling further into mental illness. I see us, not reintegrating with this connection that's actually essential to us as humans. Humans feel harmony when proportions feel right. And not only harmony, but it's a call to contemplation. In a church, we're called to look upon something greater, something bigger than us. We feel safe when geometry is balanced. It literally calms the mind. And we feel uplifted because it reflects meaning and that contemplation. And this is why temples, pyramids, even modern designs by Gaudi, like the Sacred Church, Sagrada Familia, the Sacred Family Church in Barcelona, or a lot of his designs in general, or Zaha Hadid. A lot of people love her freeform, very soft edges type of designs. And this is why. I mean, like, all of our cities should look like Zaha Hadid type designs. They feel alive, because in nature, we don't see hard edges. We don't see 90-degree angles. In nature, everything's wiggly, like the Alan Watts lecture. And so all these things are speaking to something deeper in our psyche, this need that we have, that we're neglecting ourselves from for no good reason. It's something older than words themselves. And so geometry is the language of the soul. This is where we could start talking about the architecture of the soul. Minimalism, clutter, and the psychology of space. And now if we're talking about everyday life, when a room is cluttered, your mind becomes cluttered. Your eyes scan constantly, taking in visual noise, and the brain interprets it as tasks, reminders, things to do. And this is how we get out of the moment. The only thing that exists is this moment, right now. And the task of the futurists, the visionaries, is to pull that future into right now. Because we will meet the future in the moment. And if it's not us, if it's not this generation, the Gen Z, the Zoomers, the people being born today, what kind of world are they going to inhabit if it's not going to be the future that we co-create with our technologies, with our AI machines? AI is here to stay. It's already shaping society and shaping how we conduct ourselves in society because we're using it so often. And so, we're at a critical point right now where we have to think about where we're headed. Healing architecture isn't about mere emptiness. It's about meaningful space, putting things in a meaningful way or orderly way in order to give the mind space to simply be and exist. Warm materials, natural textures, soft edges, natural textures, of the elements, stone, earth, rock, fire. In the future, I feel like every home is going to have a fireplace, or at least if it's outside, a fire pit where people can congregate. A fire pit is so essential to like rituals and ceremonial affairs. And to me, it's just so crazy that like even when you go to a beach or something, fires are illegal. So we got to think about how we could open up the architecture in our societies and our cities to allow the mind to simply be and to breathe. And of course, in rituals, every culture has used architecture for inner transformation. One of the things I can recommend is Graham Hancock's Ancient Civilizations series on Netflix. Very interesting the way that older civilizations or lost civilizations, or I think the show's called Ancient Apocalypse, sorry. How all these old civilizations that were lost, the way they designed their spaces, especially their sacred spaces, very purposeful, very meaningful to the purpose of that space. Temples, bathhouses, meditation halls, gardens, shrines, mosques, they weren't just buildings, they were ritual containers. And the people would go in and they would leave feeling refreshed, anew, ready to take on life once again. These spaces were designed to guide attention, emotion, presence, to cultivate the most sacred thing that human beings have, consciousness itself, and our connection to each other. Even today, mindfulness centers, community gardens, eco homes, they follow that, but we don't have enough of them, as I mentioned earlier. And so space influences consciousness, make no mistake about it. And it shapes who we become. And so this now is why, as a futurist, as someone who thinks about that world, who are we going to become? We don't have that discussion merely as enough. And I think it's the role of the artist to bring that to the forefront. As if you guys know me or seen any of the other live streams, you already know who some of my favorite artists are. And it's for that reason. They keep bringing these conversations to the forefront. Who are we? What are we doing here? Why don't we talk about new ideas? Why don't we paint pictures of new paradigms we can shift and enter into as a collective? And this is like the kind of wisdom that is going to turn into common sense, especially if we're going to be here in 50 to 100 years, because things are happening quick. And I think with AI coming down the gauntlet, it's going to change a lot of how we move in society, and it might even be unrecognizable. But the way things are going right now, it's not in this spirit that I'm talking about. It's more of like the dark side of human nature, instead of actually upwards and onwards and uplifting to the human consciousness and spirit. These companies are using AI for control, ego, profit, surveillance. These are things that we cannot let happen. It's not even a possibility. And even in the ways we talk about AI, or even how we show AI being used to the general public, we have to be very meticulous and intentional with our message with AI. So, the future inevitably is going to exist of cities that heal. And what does that healing mean? That healing is getting rid of all the muck and conditioning of modern society, so we continue transcending, evolving to the point where we won't even recognize this dark age, fallen, evil world we exist in currently. We might even be able to communicate without words. Cities with rooftop forests, imagine that. Solar punk neighborhoods filled with light, color, and community. Schools designed around gardens, houses that calm the nervous system, public spaces designed for conversations, for rest, and for creativity, to actually allow free thought. Wouldn't that be crazy, to design universities that actually allow students to come up with great ideas? The future is possible, but it requires us to rethink architecture as a psychological and spiritual matter. In the next 20 years, I believe mental health architecture will become as essential as structural engineering. Even in the next 5 to 10 years, it could even be tomorrow if this video reaches the right people and the right person. And if anything I'm saying is a new idea or something you haven't thought of, or, have been presented before, I would encourage you to let it simmer. Think about it, and see how your current life and the way you've designed your life, if there's anything you can do to promote this pro-human future, this solar punk biophilic, environmentally conscious existence, just for your family or your immediate surroundings, your space that you inhabit every day. And also, reestablishing that connection to nature. The 4 elements are like the foundations of life. So this whole thing is really just to say that architecture isn't just buildings. This is the neuroscience of architecture, the psychology of architecture. It's about the mind inside the building and the hearts, the spaces, what they do to our hearts. If psychology studies the mind, then architecture studies the mind in space. And when we get it right, architecture could very well be medicine. I want to talk a little bit more about the solar punk city. This is the vision I have of a city of the future. As I mentioned, there are going to be walkable cities where you can walk everywhere, kind of like in Megalopolis, where Caesar invented that path that's just kind of gliding and you just get on and it takes you where you want to go. You know, if the government, okay, pause. I don't even want to go there because this is my third or fourth YouTube channel. But it's very hard not to get political with this stuff. So we'll leave it there on that. Rooftop farms and vertical farming. You know, I'm sure you've seen vertical farming or heard the concept before. If we really don't utilize the open space available to us, the backcountry, and everybody wants to congregate around the cities, vertical farming is going to literally prolong our lives in the cities and make it actually habitable and a place where you won't feel stressed by the frequency of the city if we turn it into that solar punk vibe. Smart homes are going to exist, but generally and overall, the way I see the future integrated with technology, it's not going to be loud. It's not going to be dystopic. It's not cyberpunky. Screens aren't going to be everywhere. I mean, this is kind of what, you know, people are pushing right now because, as I mentioned earlier, they're operating from the worst and least noble of human nature. Maybe because those people are least noble, but I'm not here to make judgments about those people. You know, all that to say, the technology is inevitable. It's going to be around us, but it doesn't have to be loud. So the homes could be smart and integrated within this technology, but they could promote mindfulness. We could still, you know, travel space more than the web. And so, you know, there's a huge, I guess, renaissance of the creative today and the artists, where one person is able to think about and do a bunch of things. And this is such a testament to, you know, just the Zoomers, the Gen Zers. But in general, I think there was a big, I guess, fad with minimalism. And, you know, minimalist spaces, as I mentioned earlier, they're super essential to how we exist and operate in the super cluttered information digital age, and not to mention anything about TikTok brain or, you know, just the dopamine and serotonin imbalance in a lot of the youth today and adults. But reestablishing this stillness, this calmness in our environments is super essential. And it could be done. And it doesn't actually require much. It requires us to, you know, just have the desire to reconnect with the truth, with, you know, ourselves, each other, and nature. Because that's the fundamental connection that needs to happen. And once we have that reintegration back with nature, you know, technology will evolve right alongside us. But we need to have that as a priority and make that very intentional with our spaces, our environments, because, life can't go on how it currently is. And so with minimalism, of course, we know clear spaces, clear mind, in feng shui, following like the natural rhythms and chi of the environment, super beneficial, super important, and it makes a big difference to how we operate as human beings. But when there's clutter, and not only, of course, I'm talking about physical clutter, it just creates and distorts the mind. The stress hormone just acts up. It feels like there's always something to do, the to-do list. But we all get older, and when we're old enough, seniors, our elders, the elders of society are kind of forgotten today. Like, that's so messed up to me. We're on this treadmill headed nowhere, and it only breeds not only confusion but ego. Ideally, the cities and the environment will be designed for elders, because we're all going to get old sooner or later. Soft edges, ramps, no more staircases, and have it just be a place where it's friendly to children and to elders. And I'm not talking about any kind of extreme minimalism, because that could feel very sterile. We're not turning this whole thing into like modern hospitals. But it's going to be a balance, because even modern hospitals, arguably, do cause their own harm in their own ways. But essentially, all that to say, we don't crave empty spaces. We crave meaningful spaces. And so with minimalism, when we know where things are and we don't have so many things to look at with all this, all this clutter, all this nonsense, especially with like the way information is hitting us and we're being bombarded with like this news cycle, this TikTok thing, this trend, this reel, all these like nonsense tricks that the current systems that we're using in social media, and just overall conditioning on our brain and our mind, it's literally holding us back and having us occupied by things that are not fruitful or beneficial to any of us in any way, except our lower faculties, like lower chakra living and existence. And so this new earth I'm talking about is very much here and is very much underway. And there are people not only talking about it, because the conversations are important, the people are starting to have these conversations, but the people creating it and building it. Because if you know, you know. And this is the only reasonable, evolution that we're going to naturally ascend into. Or once we realize these systems are no longer sustainable and that they actually are collapsing, then it's like we're retreating and we're falling into these paradigms and these systems that are currently being built underground or something. I gave you two metaphors there. I don't know which one is better, or half-assed metaphors. Anyway, so in conclusion, the overall message here is that architecture could be healing. And us as human beings, the greatest gift of inspiration of anything to our future generations, to each other currently, the greatest message of hope is for us to heal. Once we heal and we're not dealing with all this nonsense of, just trying to make ends meet, the way the current system's set up in all these different industries and, paradigms. Then and only then will we begin to become who we are, and we remember what a miracle life and being human actually is. So that's all I have for you today. I don't see anyone in the chat, so I'll wrap it there. Let me know what you think. Leave your thoughts, like